What makes a great video game or movie? Is it a compelling story, a shocking plot twist, or interesting main characters? While all of the above can create memorable moments on their own, chances are the most recognizable pieces of media have music supporting them. And in this video I want to take a deep dive to explore how music can be used in game development and creative storytelling to enhance the overall experience. Hi, I'm Björn and I compose music for games, movies and other media. Although I always felt the connection between storytelling and music growing up, I only started to think about it more consciously a few years ago, once I began to work with more directors and game developers on their projects. One thing I've noticed in these interactions and discussions was that music oftentimes was only thought of as a background element. And to be fair, I might be a bit biased here as a musician, but I always felt that there are far more possibilities to use music more effectively, especially in interactive media like video games. So my goal with this video is to find some new perspectives and help you to approach music more actively in your creative process, but without the need of having intricate knowledge on the subject. And although I focus a lot on video games, especially in the second half of the video, many of the ideas are applicable for film directors and creatives working with other visual media as well. Also, I should give a small warning now that some of the examples I'm gonna use will spill some beans if you're not familiar with the movies or games. But enough of the entry talk, let's dive right in. When we talk about how music is used in storytelling, it does make sense to take a look back in time. While mood and atmosphere sounds like the title of a lost Jane Austen book, the use of music to enhance visuals was predating her work by a long shot. Especially in theaters, music already found its way into performances from ancient Greece all the way to operas and modern musicals. While Jane Austen was writing about drama, a lot of theaters were already using orchestras to enhance the performances. So when movies and narrative films popped into existence and became popular around the end of the 19th century, the practice to accompany a story with music was already set in place and evolved even further throughout the years until today. Now that we have an understanding of why even today a lot of movies and games feature orchestral instruments in their music, we still have to figure out why music plays such an important role for the viewing experience to begin with. In short, listening to music activates a whole bunch of areas in our brains, including the ones responsible for regulating emotions. Finding out how specific music invokes specific emotions would be enough to fill a whole other video. So before I have to come up with more Jane Austen jokes, let's focus on how this impact on our emotions can be used in practice. When we watch a movie or play a game for the first time, we stumble through the plot like a newborn. We don't know who the characters are or what will happen next. And just like a parent, music can take us by the hand to guide us, telling us what to feel. A fairly obvious example would be the use of fast and chaotic music for chase sequences to install stress and unease into a scene or environment. Or a peaceful song when characters are relaxing on a beach. But we can take this a step further. While reading up for this video, I came across a study which researched how music affects the relationship between a character and the audience. Let's look at a picture while we listen to some music and see how our perception is influenced. Now, let's look at the same picture, but we'll switch out the music to see if there's a noticeable change in how we perceive the person depicted. So, without changing the visuals, we created a change big enough to give us a sense of what to feel. That means choosing specific music gives us the ability to directly influence what the audience is going to think. It is a way of communicating what isn't said or shown on screen, without the need of additional dialogue. And because it's a sneaky and subtle way, directors and developers can use it to their advantage as well. Be it a jump scare where the best result comes after building up tension or creating a false sense of safety, or throw a red herring and deceive the audience with a character's intention or plot twist. Another point we should mention when we talk about atmosphere and mood is how we retain immersion in these fictional scenarios. Let's take a look at an iconic scene, where we replace the music with a more realistic approach. You'd think it'll get easier to immerse yourselves into a scene the closer to reality it is. But truth be told, reality can be a bit stale and boring, and my guess would be that one of the main reasons why we're able to glue together immersion and enjoyment so well is music. Remember how we talked about how music influences our mood ages ago? Turns out it also engages our memory in a way, in which we are not only getting familiar with the music we listen to, but we also internalize patterns despite changes of instrumentation, tempo, or sound aesthetics. Because we're able to recognize familiar tunes, the concept of themes and leitmotifs becomes incredibly valuable to us. While both of them are used for similar purposes, there's a slight difference between them. In this context, a theme is a recurring idea, and a leitmotif is a special case, which in addition to multiple repetitions is tied to specific story elements. In the same sense that all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, every leitmotif is a theme, but not every theme is necessarily a leitmotif. This all sounds a bit nitpicky, so let's go through some examples to see how both of them are used creatively. Especially with sequels, having a theme can be incredibly helpful to recognize the franchise. For the most popular ones, you probably don't need more than a picture to automatically hear the associated music. It's hard to see the Star Wars logo without hearing the first trumpet steps, playing Super Mario or Zelda without humming the main title unconsciously, or reading about Indiana Jones and having the melody stuck in your head for the rest of the day. While recognizing a familiar theme is its main purpose, in case of a leitmotif, we can start to play with the possibilities a bit more. Because a leitmotif is tied to characters, locations, or other conditions, there are multiple ways how we can inform or fool the audience with it. Just think about the menacing motif in Jaws. Even when the audience doesn't see the shark, using music as a storytelling device creates a clear indicator of when it's present in a scene. Same as hearing the first notes of the Imperial March. We all know that the next thing we're going to hear is our favorite villain's asthma inhaler. Now, I'm well aware that this is the third time that I'm using John Williams as an example, but he's just too damn good with it, so please cut me some slack. And now I'm shamelessly going to use him for a fourth time. Although the theme for Emperor Palpatine isn't as widely recognized as his apprentice's catchy tune, John Williams still found a way to use it for storytelling purposes when he snuck an altered version into the celebration of Naboo. If you compare the choir melody in The Emperor Arrives with the horn section of the parade on Naboo, the similarities are becoming obvious. Not only is the rhythm in some parts of the melody exactly the same, but in terms of music theory, both are playing in the relative minor and major key, which is just a fancy way of saying one is the happy version and one is the sad or dark one. So having a version of the Emperor theme show up when a yet-to-be-exposed Palpatine is celebrating on Naboo is such a cool way of foreshadowing his true identity. Now that we focused on leitmotifs linked to characters, let's explore some other aspects where the recognition of a leitmotif can be useful, and I'll try my hardest to give you some examples of other composers as well. Especially in stories involving time travel, catastrophic events, or larger time gaps, a leitmotif linked to specific locations might be a good option to tell a player or viewer with subtlety that they are in an already familiar place. Another way of using leitmotifs is to connect specific events and emotions. The Last of Us Part 1 does an amazing job connecting specific situations with each other. Just be aware that the next scenes contain heavy spoilers, so if you're unfamiliar with the game and still plan to play it, just skip a bit forward. In the very beginning of the game, our protagonist loses his daughter, and we experience his loss, grief, and sadness with him. So grab your tissues to revisit the scene once more, but also try to pay some attention to the music playing in the background.
Baby! Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. No. 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 Please. Please don't do this. Please.
Now let's take a look at the game's ending, where Joel is faced with a similar situation regarding Ellie, with whom he bonded throughout the game.
I got you. Oh, shit.
He's carrying her toward pediatrics. Get up here, now.
Shit.
He's over here.
I'm getting you out of here, girl.
Pick up the girl.
I got you.
Cover the exit.
I got you.
Without the game's need to explicitly tell us, The music gave us all the answers regarding why Joel made the decision he made and how he felt in the process. Because we experienced both situations as well and made the connection between both events conscious or subconsciously, with the music being a helpful reminder. Up to this point, what we discussed was applicable to both film and games. But with the interactive aspect of video games, we have some additional ways to use music to our advantage. Just like you use Google Maps today to find out where you are, you need some sort of navigation system in games as well. Especially in open world games, today it is almost expected to at least have a map, or in most cases even a minimap that is integrated into the UI. But as much of a nuisance it is to stop on a road trip to study the map, figuring out where to go next in a game has the potential to break the immersion too. Also, depending on how many points of interest your map has, it can get cluttered rather quickly, which isn't that helpful either. Not only can we use music to indicate a change of environment hand in hand with the visuals, but we can use music and sound effects like a metal detector to lure players towards important locations and treasures as well. Listen to the drums when we approach this bridge in Baldur's Gate 3 as an example. The closer we get, the more prevalent the drums are, warning players that something might happen when they proceed.
Clustered fires and tents. The Absolute's army is camped here.
Now, some might be curious and check it out right away, and players like me will probably do everything in their power to avoid it, until no stone is left unturned and explored. But in both cases, you delivered important information about a location without the need for visual displays. The same idea is applicable for characters or other points of interest as well. This is part of the audio programming I did for Game Pitch a while ago, and one of the things we wanted to test out was to have an audible cue based on the distance between the player and a specific character. So I programmed a 3D distance parameter that is linked to the volume of our main melody. So when we get closer to that specific character, the melody gets louder, and it gets muted again once we get too far away. Let's take a listen. Now we'll circle back to the beginning one more time, because we will take another look on how music can affect the atmosphere and player mood. Because in interactive settings, music not only conveys emotions, but can also affect and influence player choices and behavior. Just think about games with more repetitive gameplay, like destroying or placing a quadrillion blocks for example. If the music would blast super ultra death megatron metal instead of calm and relaxing music, doing the same thing over and over again can turn the player experience from enjoyment to annoyment really quickly. There are also options to influence players more actively, either by incorporating music as core part of the gameplay, or through more creative solutions. Like most platformers, in this passage of Ori you progress by learning the route you need to parkour through bit by bit. Because it is expected for you to fail a few times, having the music play uninterrupted when you die was a brilliant choice. It made for a way less frustrating experience, because trying to get through felt more like a single attempt to success rather than multiple efforts to overcome failure. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you have to use music in every possible way we just learned about, but if you plan on using music in your project, thinking about what you want to achieve with it beforehand can go a long way of making it way more effective. The thing is, no matter what use of music you ultimately decide on, in the end it will have implications on other parts of your game design and movie directing too. So in addition to learning about all the possibilities of music, we need to figure out how to implement them in the development cycle as well. And in order to do that, we need to take a quick detour to talk about how game and film music have fundamentally different requirements, but both bring opportunities we can use to our advantage. Although there's a wide variety of games, even when we compare movies to story-driven games, which probably come closest to them, the approach to music will change depending on one factor in particular.
The answer is time.
To be precise, when we talk about time, the term timing is probably more accurate. Just imagine we put the same character going from A to B in a video game and a movie at the same time. When rewatching the movie, our protagonists will do the same thing at the exact same time, no matter how often you watch it. Contrary to that, even if you deliberately try to get the same results from players doing multiple runs through the same level, chances are you'll get a different outcome every time. While some explore everything on their way the first time and might go for a straighter approach the second time, other players might take a toilet break and then run around the objective while talking on the phone before getting there. The challenge of writing music for a game is to accommodate every single one of these scenarios, while we don't break the immersion for any of them. On the other hand, making a movie scene stand out and enjoyable, even after watching it multiple times, poses its own difficulties. When writing to a fixed timeline of a movie, we can pick out which moments to emphasize and tailor the music to fit precisely to what is happening on screen. Cranking this attention to detail to 11 even has its own name and is called Mickey Mousing, because it's frequent use in old Disney animations. For video games, we need to create more generalized solutions, so we can change smoothly between different parts when players interact with the environment. For that purpose, we create segments with a closed loopable system, so the music fits the scenery no matter how long a player is a part of it. We still use specific moments and trigger, for example, different levels or change of scenery to switch up the music, but with this approach we only have to worry about what is happening when reaching transition points instead of what the music is doing in the segment itself. It is important to note that as diverse as games are themselves, so are their requirements and their need for changeability. Luckily, adaptivity isn't an on-off switch, but rather a dimmable feature. And because we already divide our game into different segments, we can use different variations as well. Even a detailed and more surgical score, resembling a movie in the form of cutscenes, for example. As most games give a pretty good foundation on how to segment content through story or gameplay, let's take a closer look on how we can create a supporting musical structure next. The first thing we can do is create branches, linking different segments together. We still have closed loops, but we're able to create transitions to go from one segment to the other, and depending on the context, go back to the previous segment as well. The most obvious example for this method are different levels. We have to complete the previous one to get to the next, but we can also use different musical segments inside a level to support new areas or plot points after a player completed a task or achievement. Let's take a look at another example we can frequently find in a lot of games. Do you remember moments where you fought through a level just to suddenly walk through an empty corridor with tense music? Or entering a room with a single exit and a bunch of ammo and health while the music is cutting back? Chances are shit is about to hit the fan and you have to fight a boss or face a difficult challenge ahead. So even though we're still in the same narrative chapter, we already have different segments linked to each other. We have to go through the area before the boss fight and have to best whatever the game throws at us to change the high-octane stress music back to a calm and relaxing soundtrack after beating the boss or challenge. Before we take a closer look at how we're able to achieve smooth transitions between segments, let's zoom in a bit more to see how we can make the segments themselves more adaptable. While we can navigate between segments using branching, layering is our tool of choice when it comes to creating variety in a segment on its own. We already defined a segment as its own closed loopable system. So while players stay in the segment, the music will play in a loop at all times. But there are situations where we want to increase the musical variety even further. If a player spends a lot of time in a single segment, instead of making the loop track longer, we can split it up into different sections, for example the different instruments that are playing, and switch up which parts are audible at different times. Let's circle back to our boss fight. Although there's already a lot of variety through branching segments together, chances are you're still going to be stuck in the boss fight segment for a while, depending on the boss and your skill level of course. Especially with bigger challenges, the further you progress in a fight, the harder it gets. It's not uncommon to have a few thresholds in a fight with different phases as well. To be able to emphasize this increasing intensity with the music, we can play our separate tracks simultaneously, but keep some of them muted until we reach a point in the boss fight where we want to kick it up a notch. Of course, there are other possibilities as well how we can layer music to create adaptive environments. Instead of splitting one track into different sections, running two soundtracks next to each other can be a good solution too. Instead of branching different segments together, this form of layering gives us a similar result of distinguishing between two states in the game. The difference is that we don't necessarily need to think about how to get the music from one state to the other, which in return gives us more flexibility. Think about a game where you switch between future and past, nature and robots, or something like being on land and underwater. Writing two tracks with the same structure, but changing the instrumentation, melodic elements, or just adding frequency filters to one of the tracks, we are able to switch between the two states at will without the need of a transitioning period in between. In this example, one of the initial gameplay ideas was to be able to hide yourself and sneak around the level. As getting into and out of hiding was happening rather quickly, one of the first approaches I tried was a soundtrack switch. I wrote a melody and build two tracks and two different moods around it, but keeping the same structure to be able to switch between them at all times. Let's take a listen. Although there are more possibilities to implement interactive music into your world, like creating your own sound engine for specific needs, layering and branching are probably the most common. Just remember that there's no right or wrong when deciding on which method you want to use. The final piece of the puzzle to create immersive experiences are transitions. It's not quite enough to just structure the segments to fit into different environments and scenarios. We have to make sure that we're able to switch between them in a way that supports the narrative too. The easiest way to switch the music between two segments is to crossfade between them. For that, we overlap both tracks and fade the audio from the segment we're leaving out, while raising the music of the segment we're entering. Instead of abruptly changing, our ears get eased into the new atmosphere a bit more gently. Although it seems simplistic, it isn't inferior in any way and has a lot of unique advantages. Especially in games with an open world structure, we often encounter a situation where crossfades can be the most efficient choice. When branching in a linear fashion, putting a lot of attention to detailed and specific transitions makes a lot of sense, because we have a limited number of transition points to worry about. As soon as multiple segments start to overlap, making detailed transitions for every possible change can get tricky really fast. We'd either have to simplify a lot of the music to be adaptable to every transition point, or we'd have to extend the transitions to a way bigger and complex scale. This would not only take the music longer to transition, but it would need a lot more resources in development as well. Depending on how many different areas or scenarios with individual music you want to have in your game, and in addition to that, how fast you'll get from one to the other, crossfading between them might be the best option. If you have to spend less resources on the transitions, you can work out a lot more musical details in the segment itself to make sure it'll fit the environment perfectly to begin with. On an additional note, crossfades are also used a ton to make sure that different layers and loops don't have audible cuts or distortion, which makes them a great tool to work in closed segments too. When it comes to resource-friendly music systems, having no music at all can also be a viable option. As we already talked about how commonly music is used in media to convey emotions, choosing not to use music at all is definitely a brave choice. But depending on the narrative, it can work exceptionally well. Let's take a look at some examples that use silence to enhance the environment. The whole story revolves around the relationship between Kratos and his son. Having no music in the background while you navigate the world just emphasizes the loneliness, sadness and loss they experience even further. So in this case, the use of silence helps with the immersion, because it supports the narrative just as good, if not better. And another advantage of using silence is that the impact when you finally use music is even bigger. Although God of War uses music in fight and cutscenes as well, the Souls series limits the use of music to the boss fights only, and pushing the contrast even further. The lack of music in the rest of the game makes the challenging boss encounters even more epic and special. We can transition in a less complex and timely manner using crossfades and silence, but the drawbacks can get in the way and break the immersion we worked so hard for. So to be able to switch between two segments as fluently and immersive as possible, oftentimes it is necessary to create individual transitions to switch the music without the audience noticing. Changing the music smoothly is one of the strong suits of creating a compositional transition. But doing so quickly is one of the biggest challenges we face with this approach. Instead of only enabling a smooth change at the end of each track, it makes sense to create other transition points as well. Adding these points to jump off into another segment helps to do so relatively fast, while not having to wait for one track to end. Let's take another look at the example where we programmed the melody to get louder when we get close to a specific character. As the level was supposed to end after a dialogue with that character, while writing the music, I made sure that every 8 bars we are able to jump into a short outro jingle, so we don't have to wait too long to transition into the next segment. So once our trigger is hit and the dialogue is finished, the next time we hit a transition point, we'll jump straight into the outro. Let's take a listen. Another problem we have to find a solution for is whenever two segments differ so much that finding smooth transition points between both tracks is too difficult. Luckily, to make a transition work regardless, we can use the approaches we already learned about. In case two musical parts aren't easily connectable, we can create a unique transition segment and use it to branch between them. And depending on the conditions we have to meet, we can still use transition points to shift quickly. The result is a rather predictable timeline to plan a change of environment in the development cycle already. Having visual transitions in your game can serve multiple purposes, like limiting entries to a new zone or creating a buffer zone to load more assets. But it also enables musical transitions to fit more closely to what's happening on screen. So if you ever wondered why a lot of narrow passages, bridges, or short cinematics where you lose control over your character exist, now you have a few reasons to look out for the next time you play through a game. In the same way we can use branching to transition, we also had the option to add some layering techniques to alter between segments in an even more convincing way. When facing a situation of having to switch between two segments fast, instead of crossfading between them or transitioning in a linear fashion, it is also possible to use specific instruments or parts of the music in both segments when creating the tracks. Even with bigger changes in the music, the transition will be way less noticeable once our ears can latch onto something familiar. One of the first choices to carry over are usually rhythm instruments, like drums or percussion. As they don't carry too much melodic information or changes with them, using them as an anchor point kills two birds with one stone. As there's no need to wait for a phrase or melody to finish, we can switch back and forth quickly, maintaining a prominent feature in both tracks, while also masking the changes happening in the transition. While drums and percussion are always a good way to raise the energy and support high action moments, being highly adaptable helps too in making them one of the most prominent features when it comes to fight and battle sequences, where players need to transition in and out of combat quickly. To get a better idea how to switch segments using compositional tools, let's watch a demo of Kirby and the Forgotten Land together, and I'll highlight the used methods. The first thing I listened to when analyzing the level was how many different instrument layers I could spot. Instead of focusing on single instruments, I try to find specific functions to identify. In this case, I'm noticing a melody layer played by horns, a rhythmic layer with different drums, and a few background pads, strings for example. Let's pause here for a second. I'm guessing that somewhere on this balcony a trigger point is located. The current melody will finish its phrase before the music switches to a reduced version with only some pads and the drum part playing. Let's pause here for a second time. As soon as we enter the cafeteria, there's a switch to a transition segment, keeping the same drum part. Also, as players lose control of the character and camera, and an animation starts playing, we enter a short fixed timeline. And that enables a more detailed compositional transition, as we only have the shared rhythm instruments supporting the change quickly before that. After another short animation without character control, the boss fight starts, and we finally arrived in the next gameplay segment where the new music can loop again. Oh, and before I forget, there's one more. If silence can be used to unlock an effective transition with a narrative purpose, a hard cut can achieve the same with a crowbar, to the face. In case of Pokemon games, having a sudden change without smoothing the transition will take you by surprise. Just like wild Pokemon in tall grass or trainers sprinting towards you across the screen. But in fact, most of the time you'll find a big variety of methods used simultaneously, depending on the game structure. In the end, it doesn't matter if you use one or a combination of a few. The important part is that you choose the option that enables you to create the feeling and the game you want to send out to the world. Usually the effect you want to achieve will dictate your use of music in the first place. But hopefully after watching this video, you can get there with a bit less compromise and with more intent. If you have any remaining questions or I've missed a method, leave a comment below, and please consider hitting the like and subscribe button if you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and I'll see you around.